Now we were told about this, and when we reached out to you to talk about this, you gave us a lot of information about this election contest. But first, I want to ask, when were you first approached about this election contest, and when were you first approached about these cases?
Sure, right after the election, I got a call from some folks in Loving County, and I think they came to me because I had tried an election contest in Loving County in 2007, and I was very familiar with the long-standing voting schemes out there.
And this was the election in 2022, or this recent one in 2023?
No, the general election in 2022,
Okay.
and there was a countywide race that tied, another one that was a 12-vote margin, and a commissioner's race that was a 6-vote margin.
And why is this election being contested right now?
Because people who don't live there vote there. And when we were serving these disputed voters with their subpoenas to come to trial, we had to serve them in places as far away as Amarillo, Lubbock, and Fort Worth because that's where they really live.
And then you said that these people also voted in different counties, like you just said, Amarillo and other places like that. There was also a little bit of
But let me back that up. They didn't vote in other counties, they live in other counties.
that's
Voting in two places would be a big crime.
right.
Yeah,
Thank you for the correction,
yeah.
ma'am. So you also say, so we also, when I was reading through the affidavit and reading through the cases, there was a lot of talk about votes being moved in to Loving County. What does it mean when someone tries to move in votes? And just, can you give a definition of what that is?
Someone's worried about the reelection, so they call up their relatives and ask them to register in Loving County and vote there, even though they know full well the relative lives in Lubbock or Montgomery or some other place far away.
And just to, I know you touched on this earlier, but just to reiterate, which races are the ones that are being contested in this election? And if you go in a little more detail on those.
Yeah, I'll walk through. The race for Justice of the Peace in Loving County is such a small county, there's only one Justice of the Peace, and it's a countywide seat. That race tied in the November election. The race for District County Clerk, there was a 12-vote margin. And then in a commissioner's race, there was a 6-vote margin. That's Commissioner Precinct 2.
Okay. And there's also a lawsuit being brought up against Loving County as well for one former county worker, one former election worker who is filing under the Texas Whistleblower Act. Can you give a definition of what the Texas Whistleblower Act is?
The Whistleblower Act is when someone is punished for calling out violations of the law or policy and punished in their employment, whether by giving unfavorable work assignments or flat out driven out of their job, which was what happened to the young woman in that case.
And if you could go into a little bit of detail, if you're allowed to, what did happen to this young woman in that whistleblower case?
Well, I think one of the most grievous things she saw is two voters came to vote. And if you're on the suspense list, you have to fill out what's called a statement of residence card, where you swear to your current residence. Well, these two voters put in an address not in Loving County, in Odessa. And by then, the clerk had realized something was amiss with her employment and with the way elections were run in Loving County. So she knew there'd be trouble. She put the cards away. She comes back to work a following day, and the cards have been moved. And the county clerk, who admitted to and testified to this at trial, and the deputy county clerk called those voters, had them come back, and so that they could put in a different address and one that was in Loving County. So they altered that document, that election document, and from my opinion, to cover up what they were doing, getting people who do not live there to vote in Loving County so they can keep their elected positions and stay in power. And one thing to understand about Loving County now versus years ago, it's the epicenter of the oil boom. There's a lot of money flying around. The county budget's been skyrocketing. So control of that money is at stake.
Okay. And who else is being implicated in these suits, if you're allowed to say? Just who is this case being brought against as well?
Well, election contests are strange things. They're not really lawsuits. You don't have plaintiff versus defendant. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about what's the true outcome of the election. So you have contestants, those who lost their races, that believe something untoward happened, and then the contestees, the people who were initially declared the winner, But the issue in the case is, were they the true winner? Were illegal votes counted, or were legal voters prevented from voting or having their votes counted? And in our case, we raised both issues. We challenged 24 voters for not being residents of the county. And then there were 2 voters who were newcomers to the county, whom the deputy clerk and the county clerk, both of whom were candidates on the ballot, prevented from voting in local races.
Okay. And right now, with those cases and with all of this, all that you said, are any of those contestees, are any of them potentially facing any criminal charges in this?
That's not for me to say. And there is a slight difference in an illegal vote for election contest purposes and an illegal vote for criminal liability purposes. And that largely has to do with their mindset, whether they knew what they were doing was illegal or knew what they were doing was wrong. And one thing that makes me particularly sad about Loving County is people have been misled by the powers that be there. They've been told things were legal when they're not. And that is, it's not only dishonest, it puts people at risk and worries me for some of the folks who live there or don't live there who thought they were doing the right thing, but were not under the law.
Mm-hmm. And what are you personally hoping the outcome of, what are you personally hoping the outcome of not only this election challenge, but also some of these cases may be?
But, corruption is bad for business. It's not just bad for people and democracy. And that county has been drugged down by this long-standing pattern of behavior. And it keeps the county from operating honestly. It keeps the county from growing naturally. And it's exploitive. It's exploitive of the people, and it's exploitive for the businesses who are there trying to do good work. And so I hope to break that open.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize for that.
Yeah, you want to do that again so you don't?
No, it's okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm. So, will there be a new election, and if so, when would this new election be?
There will be a new election in at least 2 of the races. Both sides could appeal the trial court decision, and that decision hasn't been made yet, but should happen in the next couple of weeks. And then once an appeal runs its course, the judge will order a date for a new election sometime in the spring.
Okay. And when do you think you'll be able to get this? When will this first get into court? Like, when will these cases be brought up against to a judge?
Well, we've already gone through our trial, and let me also say this case drug on for a really, really long time. Normally, election contests are over in a couple of months, but this one went on and on and on because of some of the litigation tactics that were used by the contestees. We had our trial in August. The judge just ruled in December, and now both sides are deciding whether or not to appeal. The appeal, if it does happen, will happen quite quickly. And hopefully, fingers crossed, at least by the primary in March, we'll have a new election set.
Okay. And how many people will be removed from the voter registration rolls out there in Loving County because of this?
Well, the final number remains to be seen pending appeal, but I believe the court struck down 10 voters as residents. And again, like some of them were in Lubbock, some were in Odessa, some were in Pecos. But not in Loving County. And, a longtime curious thing about Loving County, right? The census in the last census was only 64, but there's over 100 registered voters. So that tells you something.
And how do we know that similar cases like this aren't happening just here in Texas, but across the nation?
We don't. And I'll say this about voting fraud. Voting fraud is rare. Our system is designed to catch it. But to really enforce it, these election contest cases are necessary. And I'm sure there are plenty of instances out there, or at least some instances out there, where people wanted to bring an election contest, but they couldn't afford it. It's expensive, and it's really unpredictable. But one great thing about our system is there's a lot of documentation. So it's pretty easy to catch things when people do try to cheat, when people play games with mail-in ballots, which can happen. But the great thing about mail-in ballots is they're heavily documented. It's really easy to add dates and paperwork together and make sure everything went by the book. And people can try to cheat with their residency, but we have lots of public records that are easily accessible now. It's no longer so hard to find out where people are taking homestead exemptions or where they own nice homes when they're claiming what amounts to a shack in Loving County or a relative's hunting camp as their place of residence for the purposes of voting.
Okay. And is there anything else that you want to add on to this that I wasn't able to ask you about or that you believe would be beneficiary to this?
Well, I become increasingly concerned about corruption in rural Texas because we have so few tools to go after it. We used to have a statewide public integrity unit that was well funded, and that funding was cut a few years ago. So there's fewer and fewer tools in the toolbox for state officials. Federal officials have been stretched pretty thin, and election contests are a great way to take a look at things and see where people are cheating to stay in power and keep their control over public monies to use for their own ends.